Okay, everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us today on what's just coming out of a very blustery and wintry time. It's lovely to have you all here. I'm Sharon Smith. I am the Member Support Officer for CWA, and I'm delighted that we're focusing on this health and safety and risk assessment in woodland management at such a timely moment, given that we've had two back-to-back storms this week. Unfortunately, our first speaker, Ruaraidh Taylor, and his colleague Ian Bone aren't able to attend today due to illness. So I need to thank John Ireland, who has stepped in very last minute to pick up the mantle. John currently works for Forestry and Land Scotland. He's a health and safety advisor in forestry, and he's also involved in his local Kilmallock Community Company, so near where he stays in Fort William. So my thanks go to John for stepping in last minute and helping us out. Today, our presentation, we've got two further presentations from Piers Voysey, who's CWA's very own forester. He's got years of experience and in all things Windblow and standing deadwood, and I'm sure he'll give you some great information about both subjects. And finally, we'll be joined by Ross Johnston and Tim Elliott from Cambusbarron and Community Woodland in Stirlingshire, and they're going to share with you all a little bit of information about the role of a tree survey in improving health and safety in their woodland. So, timescale, we have 2 hours together, and I'm obviously roughly going to split up each of the presenters for half an hour each, with 5 minutes questions within that time. But I would like us all to have a little break in between both of Piers's sessions so that you can just stretch your legs and get a bit of a screen break as well. So we'll be doing that halfway through. I will send out a link to where the recording is on YouTube. I'll also send out a PDF of the slides, and I'll also be sending out a feedback form after this session. So that'll be next week before they come to you. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over to John, who's about to take the reins over on the presentation. John, welcome. John seems to have disappeared out of the meeting. Let me see if I can call him in.
That's unfortunate. You gave him control and he disappeared.
And then he's disappeared. You might be stepping in the shortcoming. Unfortunately, I am not on my other email, so bear with me and see.
Do you want me to ping him a quick email?
I'm not sure which email he's come through and if he's come on his work one or his personal one. I have his contact number here though. Wonder if I give him a phone. Oh, hold on. Nope, somebody else coming in. What I'll do, Piers, I wonder if you would want to start on one of the first sessions, if you wouldn't mind. And what I'll do is I will pop off screen and give John a phone and find out if he's able to reconnect with us or not. It might have IT issues with the weather being as it is. Is that okay for you to do that, Piers?
Yeah, no, totally. I'll take control and scroll along to
your slide 24.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get there in a minute, folks. Here we go. Right.
Thank you, Piers.
Okay. Maybe John's got a tree down over his phone line or his micro disc. There he is. He's coming in now. Will I carry on anyway and do this bit of the presentation about Windblow? And many of you are going to face a lot more experience than I've had in many ways. Some of you with plantations will have met scenarios like the image on the screen, where you've got multiple trees down in a plantation, a lot of twisted trees, a lot of hung up trees, a lot of trees safely on their backs, but with sometimes quite imposing root plates hanging over them. So it just reinforces health and safety for landowners, and that while you've got a woodland, you're working with a dynamic environment. You're always having to adjust your risk assessments, go out, reassess, etc. So you get storm damage like this, and your priority is always safety. Sometimes the wind will leave trees in a precarious situation. On the whole, though, you will be able to make a fairly quick assessment, decide that most of the windblow is pretty stable, and relax to some extent, except you will be faced with quite a lot of tidying up to do to clear paths and to ensure that paths are fully safe. If at all in doubt about health and safety, then do close off the path, make it known to people that they're entering a dangerous environment if they do go beyond your red and white tape. You won't be able to prevent all access, but you should be able to communicate the fact that you're uncertain about safety and people need to make their own judgment on that. Sometimes you can get in and assess that a situation is relatively stable. You'll be able to get some of the paths cleared up just by taking off the tops of windblown trees and let the rest of the trees settle down. And these pictures are from the woodlands on the back of Kingussie. They're not community-owned woodlands, they're privately owned, but they were impacted by a storm a couple of years ago, and they tidied up the key bits to get the paths cleared, and then some of the minor trails they've had closed off for quite a while now while they try and get the harvesting machines in to tidy up the windblow. And that's, the fact of that delay is a lot to do with the time it takes to get contractors lined up and to get permission to build a road access for the timber lorries, etc., etc. So storms can really knock around your plans. And along with organising contractors, you'll need to get felling permissions and adjustment to the felling plans, etc., to enable you to legally tidy up the windblow and get a restock agreement with Scottish Forestry. So there's a fair bit of paperwork that goes along with the damage, not including the extra running around you have to do to make hazard risk assessments. So making an assessment of windblow and assessing the risk to visitors is one thing. The other thing is making an assessment of the risk to contractors. And Forest Industry Safety Accord have got requirements for contractors who are dealing with wind throw if they're using a chainsaw. By far the safest thing to do is to get a harvesting machine in there so that you don't have chainsaws working alongside complex windblow. The windblow can accumulate some quite hazardous tension and compression in the trees. And if you're working with a chainsaw and cutting into these logs, that compressed energy or tensile energy can be released very powerfully, and trees can swipe sideways or they can flip upwards without very much provocation at all, and root plates can come down on top of operators, etc. So a lot of hazards associated with multiple windblow. Some of your contractors will feel competent at dealing with simple windblow, but if it's complex windblow, then you really should be asking for the training under 306 chainsaw operations with wind throw or windblow training, and that will be on their training tickets as ticket number 306. So look for that number on their training tickets to ensure that your chainsaw operators have the competency and the training to deal with complex windblow. As I said, simple windblow, you might feel comfortable letting someone without a windblow ticket tackle it, but you'd want to make sure that they've got quite a good number of years of experience and have done similar sorts of situations before. So I've rattled through that at a rate of knots to allow John to come in behind me again. But if you've got any questions or comments about your own experience, please chip in now.
If I may, just Tim Elliott from Cambusbarron. We've had some storm damage over the last few days, well, 2 or 3 days really, and we've got someone out posting notices to close footpaths as we speak today, and WhatsApp has just come in showing that. We had a sort of internal discussion about using ticker tape or how should we do it, and concluded it's more helpful to put up signs with a bit of explanation. Because community forests are very open to people, dog walkers and all the rest of it, rather than just a ball bit of plastic ticker tape that's probably going to blow away in the next, either next person walking straight through it, or else in the next bit of wind and it leaves plastic kicking about. So it was just the approach that we took in the short term anyway.
Yep, that sounds very sensible. I mean, one of the good things about putting up signs is that, again, you can take photographs, you can log those positions on a map if necessary, take a photograph and date when the action was taken. And that helps cover your backs as well in terms of litigation if people go past those barriers.
Hello, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
James Tebb, Strathkinnis Community Trust. One question, our wood is heavily walked, sort of day and evening. And do you ever get to a situation where when the wind is so bad, as it has been over the last few days, where you should advise the public not to enter the wood? It's only a 12.6 hectare woodland, so it's not a big area, but we do have concerns about some leaning trees which are in the programme for removing.
Yeah, my understanding is that if you've got any trees that are of imminent risk of failure, so you can see their root plates are rocking, for example, or there's a very obvious split and not a lot holding them upright, then those trees need to be taped off and dealt with in a very short period of time. Apart from that, for people going into a wood generally, they should know that it's a dangerous environment, and that's assumed by legal entities as well. I don't think there are many woodlands that say this wood is dangerous in strong wind conditions, please do not enter. I don't know anyone who has to do that, and it's often assumed by the law courts that people should understand this is, it's an inherent knowledge that people should have about going into those environments.
Thank you. Yes, we have one tree at the moment which the root plate is dangerous, and it's in process for removing. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yes, I wonder if it's worthwhile finding out what is the level of damage in the woodlands of the people that are here, just with regards to the recent storms.
Yeah, I mean, around Kinusey, we've avoided anything since day after Boxing Day. We had a little bit of localized damage at Feshy Bridge just after Boxing Day, but apart from that, our woods have been pretty intact. The roads have had a bit of work done to them even in the last couple of days. There's been a little bit of work alongside roads, but otherwise not much.
We had some a contractor, and we don't do any work on public roadsides. The trust don't have volunteers with any sort of training to do that, but we have had a company called Special Ranch to remove trees at the side of the road which were dangerously down over a minor B road. So there has been some, and there's been a few trees down, but nothing significant.
At Cambusbarron, we've had you know, a number of individual trees, many of them identified hazardous ones anyway, that we were getting around to dealing with, and kind of nature has assisted with that to some extent, and a few new trees as well. But it depends where they happen. If they're across major paths, then it's obviously more of an issue than they are if they're off in the woodland itself.
Hi,
Gareth.
please go ahead.
Oh, Gareth from Dunnet Forest. We're way up on the north coast. We before Christmas we didn't get that badly hit, but this last week with the snow, we've had more trees down than I think we've ever had. So we're actually at a point where we're kind of looking. I think we're going to have to look at our long-term forestry plan, because the amount of work that we've got now with clearing the windthrow, the new windthrow, I think is actually going to knock us off track on our long-term forestry plan. So we need to, I think we're going into a situation where we're going to need to sort of like do lots of walks around and reassessing everything, and sort of yeah, asking the volunteers to come in on more days than they normally do, I think, just to try and get all the paths cleared and made safe.
Hi, yeah, this is Ewan from Inch Community Holdings, not far from Kingussie. We have a small forest. We have a lot of standing dead at the moment, and some of them are starting to look as though they may threaten paths. Just a quick note, our volunteers, we make sure that everyone that's working in the forest has a chainsaw qualification, and that's something we've insisted on. Just one note on local damage through the most recent storms. Glenfeshie has been really devastated. There are thousands of trees up there that have come down, and it's going to take, I imagine, years if some of that ever manages to get cleared up.
Out of interest, Gareth, sir, at Dunnet, have you got anyone trained up to deal specifically with Windblow, or are they just basic chainsaw qualified?
No, we do. Our forester is trained up and beyond. Yeah, our forester has got all of those training, all of that training, and we have one of our volunteers. He's also trained, and we're actually, it's one of those things. We're waiting. We've got funding put aside to put a couple more of our volunteers who have got their initial chainsaw tickets, to put them onto the windthrow course. We're just waiting for dates for when we can send them away to do their training on that. But we're very lucky with our forester and one of our volunteers.
Great.
This is Jim Murray here at Ayr Community Trust near Inverness. We too have had quite a bit of windblow over the last couple of weeks. Sadly, a problem at the moment is getting access into the wood because it's so waterlogged, it's difficult to move about. But none of our trees seem to be in a hazardous position. So we're just waiting for, happily we have a professional tree surgeon as one of our volunteers. So he'll deal with taking the root plates off, and then those of us who have cross-cutting tickets will then deal with it once they're safely on the ground. But we've been let off fairly easily over the last couple of storms.
Hi, I'm Andy Robertson from Annagach Woods in Granton. We've got 380 hectares so far, and I think maybe Alice, you might know about today, but until the last couple of days anyway, we've escaped pretty lightly. Just really tiny numbers of trees down, for which we're very thankful. But as you know, there's never any guarantees as to how things go in the future.
Yeah, it's Mick Drury from Forest Friends. We've got a small community woodland. No significant damage really. A couple of dead trees came down in the wood, and we had one or two difficult hung up branches, which we've already had. They've already been dealt with. So yeah, I don't know of any significant damage up around here.
That's great. Thank you, folks. Is that everybody who wants to contribute at the moment? I mean, for me, it raises a couple of things in terms of highlighting some organisations who have got their volunteers and regular chainsaw users qualified in Windblow management, and also using a qualified person to do the difficult stuff, leaving the cross-cutting for your less qualified volunteers to deal with, which is good solution. The other thing that is increasingly available to community groups is the use of drones. So if you've got a plantation that's been hard hit by windblow, then using a drone to get a few photographs from the air is a good way of trying to assess what damage you've got, quantifying it, and getting a forest plan amendment submitted a bit more timeously than having to wait for someone to survey the woodland in detail. So I don't know whether that's an opportunity for some folks. But yeah, some woodlands can wait for a couple of years before you need to do anything to them, depending on how quickly the timber deteriorates and whether you want to try and get it to market quickly or whether your markets are swamped and you have to wait anyway before you can get access to a market or access to a harvester. Okay, Sharon, back to you, I think.
Am I taking control back? Fabulous. Yeah. Okay. There's a slide with some links there, Piers. Is that important just now?
Yeah, the slides will be available at the end of the session, won't they? So
yeah,
you can grab those from the presentation afterwards.
Fabulous. Okay, John, I think we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah,
John,
everything's working again, hopefully.
Are you back on your computer or are you still on your iPad?
No, I'm back on my computer, actually.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, you can take control.
We'll take control there. Hi there, my name's John Ireland. In my day job, I work for Forestry and Land Scotland. I started working in forestry kind of age 16 back in 1978, down the borders, actually. I was a chainsaw operator and I was a machine operator, skyline winch operator, before I became a forester. Went to forestry college, became a forester, became kind of like supervising forestry work, stuff like that. So worked in the forest industry for a long time. I've been a member of Kilmally Community Company, which has a couple of tiny wee bits of woodland. We've got a wee bit of oak woodland and a wee bit of pine woodland that we manage. So I'm a member of the community company and kind of assist them with their sort of like forestry stuff and things. Now, my current role in FLS is that I'm a health and safety advisor for FLS. I've been doing that role for the last kind of 15 years. I was initially working across Scotland, England and Wales, but I'm now just like in Scotland based. So I deal a lot with the kind of health and safety side of forestry and stuff when it goes wrong. So as an industry, we're a kind of high risk industry next to farming and construction in the kind of serious accidents and fatalities and things that we have. So on average, we have 3 to 4 fatalities a year within the forest industry. Some years we have more, some years we have less, but on average it's about 3 to 4. So yeah, high risk industry. And what you were talking about there, windblow, one of the highest risk bits of a high risk industry is working on windblow and things. So anyway, that was just to give you a wee bit of background to me. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of give you a wee chat through forestry kind of regs in relation to kind of machinery stuff, actually small machinery and things there. But it does actually kind of build onto the other talks and things that you'll hear later on the bits there. So if we go next. Okay, so why do we do this? This is the kind of hierarchy that I always like to kind of refer to. So morally, we want people to be safe. We want everybody to go home. We don't want to make people ill. So that's both people doing the work and people affected by the work. So kind of members of public and things within your woodlands and stuff there. Legally, we have to do stuff. We've got like the Health and Safety at Work Act. We've got Occupiers Liability Acts. That kind of control us legally in the things that we have to do. Financially, if you think health and safety is expensive, try having an accident. Now, I deal with a lot of civil claims at work. On average, we face, as an organisation, FLS faces about £10 million a year in civil claims. And part of my job is kind of like making sure that we're not having to kind of pay out £10 million a year in civil claims and stuff there. So financially, makes a lot of sense to actually look after people and comply with the law and things there, because it can cost you a lot of money in both civil claims and fines from the criminal side of the law, like Health and Safety at Work Act. Public relations, that's the final one. You don't have to kill and injure many people to get yourself in the news. And often that's not good for your kind of reputation, your kind of businesses and stuff there. So as I say, moral's like the top of the tree for me. So, take care of that bit. Morally, we set out to not hurt people and keep people safe on the things there. Dealing with fatal accidents is the worst part of my job. I hate it, absolutely hate it. So I put a lot of time and effort into trying to keep people alive and well and not getting injured. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of celebrate the Health and Safety at Work Act. I'm a bit of a Health and Safety at Work nerd. So 50 years since the Health and Safety at Work Act came into being, Lord Robbins created this fantastic piece of legislation back in 1974. Now, Lord Robbins was in charge of the Coal Board when the Coal Board wipes out schools down in Wales with like landslips with some of their coal tips and stuff like that. He never quite recovered from that, having to deal with all the kind of aftermath of that and things. But that was one of the reasons he got put in charge of kind of creating the Health and Safety at Work Act, was that he was really driven to try and get kind of like industry tidied up. Before we had the Health and Safety at Work Act, we had all sorts of different kind of health and safety acts that kind of controlled industry. But the Health and Safety at Work Act kind of brought all them together, and he created this fantastic bit of legislation, which it's called kind of like, it's an enabling act. So it's a landmark piece of legislation, and it's significantly contributed to the well-being of employees and people affected by work, like members of public. Now, you think of the experience that Lord Robbins went through, having to deal with all the families and stuff when they killed all the school kids in Wales and things. That's part of the reason that they put that work, mustn't affect people not at work type thing. So Health and Safety at Work Act has various sections in it. Section 2 being all about kind of employees. Section 2, it's like how you kind of deal with people that you employ at work. Section 3 is about contractors and members of public and things, and keeping them safe on the bit there. So, a lot of people, a lot of countries actually look at our kind of health and safety legislation and really like it. It's the inclusivity of it. It's about how it kind of applies to everything that makes such a difference. And it's about its concept of duty of care. So it's employers must take reasonable steps to ensure the health, safety and welfare of employees. And that led to a significant shift in workplace culture. Now, as volunteers working in volunteer groups and stuff, Health and Safety at Work Act does kind of apply to you, because it's about volunteers and things are seen as being at work. And that you need to be the kind of evidence that you've kind of thought about things. and that you've got controls in place to keep people safe, and that you're looking after both the people doing the work and the people affected by the work. But it's important to note that the level of responsibility of the Act varies on the kind of nature of the work. If you're doing kind of relatively low risk stuff, you're not expected to do a lot. But as soon as you start doing stuff like clearing windblow, volunteers running about on quads, doing work with quads, stuff like that, you have a much higher kind of duty of care under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So what's one of the key things that you need to do under the Health and Safety at Work Act is risk assessment. Now, risk assessment is a legal requirement under kind of managing health and safety at work regs, which is kind of goes with the Health and Safety at Work Act. But risk assessment is a great way of thinking about things. It identifies the hazards, it prevents accidents, and it promotes kind of like a safety culture. Regular risk assessment helps foster it shows people doing the work that you care about the kind of health and safety of it there. And as I say, like doing good health and safety, keeping people alive saves you a lot of money. And it saves the country a lot of money and having to deal with a lot of ill people and injured people and things there. So risk assessment, proactive measures that help ensure the health and safety of people while also protecting the group from potential legal and financial repercussions. It's a good thing to do. Can't bang on enough about risk assessment. It's definitely a good thing to do. And risk assessment is about having a discussion about the work that you're going to do, how we're going to do it, who's in charge of the controls, who's going to make sure the controls happen, and then the work takes place, sort of thing. Your written bit of the risk assessment is a record of that kind of discussion. So often people kind of just write risk assessments and don't actually discuss the work with people. Really, you should be having a good sort of detailed discussion with the folk who are going to be doing the work. Figure out what's your hazards, figure out what's your controls, and figure out who's going to make sure these controls stay in place. So when you're using stuff like machinery, like chainsaws, like power barrows, like mini diggers, whacker plates, things like that, risk assessment and having that discussion with the people doing the work really contributes towards their kind of health and safety and people who they affect, like members of the public, how their work affects them, sort of thing. And it's really important to record these discussions, so that's why you need that kind of written down bit of the risk assessment. It makes such a difference, being able to evidence that you've thought about things. So under kind of health and safety legislation, basically you're guilty till proven innocent. If something goes wrong, the health and safety executive will come along and investigate. So if somebody's been killed or seriously injured, when they come and investigate, they start from the premise that you haven't got anything, so that you're basically guilty, and you have to prove to them that you've got the records, you've done your risk assessment, you've had a think about things, you've got maintenance records of the machinery, you've got training records of the people, you can evidence their competency. Now, competency is about people being, they've got skills, knowledge, aptitude, like they want to work safely, training. So training's part of competency, and experience is a huge part of competency as well. So that skills and experience is all part of that kind of competency stuff. So it's not just training. So Windblow is a good example of that. You can be trained in Windblow, but maybe you've not done a lot of work in Windblow. So are you competent? You've got the training, but have you got the skills and knowledge? And how do you kind of build that? And that's one of the things they've started doing with chainsaws, is that chainsaw operators, is that they're starting to ask them to kind of build like CVs of their work. So that when you have people come to do work for you, or you're doing work, they should be keeping a note of the work that they do, so they can evidence, yeah, I've cut in Windblow before, I've did this for X number of weeks in this location, sort of thing. And that helps build your like competency bit, which is something that people would look for, So are you competent to do the work? Skills, knowledge, aptitude, training, and experience. Can you evidence the experience of, having worked in multiple Windblow or whatever? Okay, so yeah, so Health and Safety at Work Act, as I say, applies. As does your kind of Occupiers Liability Acts and stuff, which is your civil law. on the bit there when you're doing stuff, and doing stuff with machinery kind of raises the risks of both you affecting folk and people being affected, you know, that are using the machinery, things going wrong, stuff there. People using strimmers, chainsaws, and as I say, like the power barrows, quads, you know, ATVs, rollovers on ATVs, you know, head injuries and fatalities are quite common. Stuff there. So we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so health and safety legislation, so legal duties, criminal law, and then you've also got civil law with your kind of occupiers liability stuff. So the health and safety legislation is generally what's used to prosecute. They don't kind of prosecute you under the individual acts, you know, like say the Working at Height Act or the CDM regs. If something's gone wrong, they generally just hit you with the big stick, and it's like, have you broken the Health and Safety at Work Act? Did you do risk assessment? Is that suitable and sufficient? You know, did you break Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act? Did you break Section 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Act? And that's what they hit you with. So to help you, you've got stuff like approved codes of practice, so what we refer to as ACOPs, so documents approved by HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, gives practical advice on how to comply with the various acts and regulations. So there's like ACOPs about how to apply with, you know, the work at height regs. So you've got people fixing your building and they're working on the roof. How are we going to manage that? Let's have a wee look at the ACOP and see what we're doing, you know. You've also got industry guidance. That was great seeing the FISA stuff getting mentioned previously. So FISA guides for your forestry stuff. Arbicort stuff comes under the Arboriculture Association. VSG, good guide, visitor safety group, good guide about kind of managing civil liability, stuff like that. So you've got guidance, which, you know, if you follow that kind of guidance, generally you're following the law. If you're following the ACOPs, generally you're following the law. So you know, if you know you're not breaking the Health and Safety at Work Act type thing. And then you'll have your own volunteer group policy documents. So that would be stuff like, so what's our volunteer policy, our volunteer group's policy for rope swings in the forest? You know, what do we do if we find rope swings? Well, here's what we do, you know, stuff like that. So that's your kind of like hierarchy of policy documents that you would look for and use, I think there. So as I was banging on about earlier, so health and safety legislation, prosecutions can be made on the potential of harm, not strictly on harm caused. So they don't have to wait for an accident to happen. If an HSE inspector, as happened to me when I was in charge of a site, happened to be driving by, they were on holiday at the time, but they were still very interested in the site. So they drove through the site. The site crossed a public road. We had like traffic lights for stopping the cars. Forwarder would drive across the road, stack the timber on the other side of the road. HSE inspector went past and decided, oh, I'm just going to have a wee visit and have a look and see what's happening, even though they were on holiday. So they came for a visit. Now, if we didn't have everything, our ducks in a row, we don't necessarily have had to have injured somebody. We just needed to have not had stuff kind of ducks in a row, and they could have prosecuted us and the things there. So employers have been prosecuted for allowing people working at height, for example, without adequate protection, even though no one has had a fall or suffered injury. So you don't actually have to have injured somebody to be prosecuted. But HSE legislation is there to enforce the moral obligation to prevent harm. That's what the Health and Safety at Work Act is all about. It's all about that moral side. Think about Lord Robbins. He was deeply driven after that serious accident where he was like, we need to get this better. We need to get people, you know, being safe at work and work not affecting people. So small plant and machinery. How do we prevent accidents and incidents from happening on the stuff there? So what we're looking at there, so using small plant and machinery, I was thinking about the kind of risks and benefits of volunteers using small plant and machinery. Yeah? So what's the risks? So you've got safety hazards. Operation of small plant machinery can pose risks to the volunteers, to themselves, also to other people. So I'll run somebody over with a power barrow, or I'll run somebody's dog over with a power barrow or whatever on the stuff there. So if they don't use them properly, so you can have accidents, injuries, property damage. So I'm trimming and I smash the car's windscreen, you know, in the car park, things like that. So if the machinery is mishandled, if safety precautions are not followed, if people aren't competent, that kind of skills, knowledge, aptitude, training, experience, you know. So lack of experience, volunteers may not have the necessary training, experience to operate small plant machinery, you know, safely and efficiently. This can increase the risk of accidents, damage to the machinery or the surrounding environment. Quads, ATVs is a good example of that. So environmental impact as well, improper use can have negative effects on the ecosystem. You know, you can damage soil compaction, all that type of stuff. You can damage tree roots, things like that. You know, harming the plant life, the bluebells, all this, you know. So noise and disturbance as well. So one, you can expose the people using the machinery to noise, other people to noise, and you may affect kind of like wildlife, things like that. So there is risks. So what's the benefits? So the benefits, so increased efficiency. I can do a lot more if I'm using a strimmer than if I'm cutting it by hand. I can do a lot more if I'm using a chainsaw than a bushman. You know, so there is kind of, you know, that kind of increased efficiency. Access to difficult areas. So, you know, it could take me an hour to walk in there. If I use the quad, I can be up there in 15 minutes, you know. That's your type of thing, you know. Skills development, it can, you know, encourage people to volunteer if they think they're going to have, you know, get given skills, get used to doing stuff, become competent in using machinery. So it can enhance their personal development, increase their employability in related fields. You know, if I want to become a forestry person or something, and I'm working with a volunteer group and they're training me and stuff, and I'm much more employable in the, you know, if I go off to the industry sort of thing. So it's really important for woodland volunteer groups to assess the risks and benefits before deciding the use of small plant and machinery. Proper training, safety protocols, environmental considerations should be implemented to minimise the risks, maximise the benefits. And you need to think about stuff like halves as well. So hand-arm vibration. So, you know, if I'm using the chainsaw for a lot of time, or using strimmers are the worst, especially brush cutters with the metal blades on them and things, for damaging your hands and your, you know, like how your circulation works. Noise exposure. So you need to manage stuff like the hand-arm vibration risks and things. So, you know, thinking about how you would do that. And that all basically boils down to kind of like risk assessment and things there. So key thing to think about when you're using small plant machinery is risk assessment, as I said. So important to keep records, be able to evidence decisions made and checks undertaken. So you need to be the evidence kind of maintenance and things of the machinery as well as the, you know, the checks undertaken for folk actually using them and kind of supervising them, making sure that they're carrying out the controls that you've come up with your risk assessment, you know. So for example, you know, power barrows, risk of injury due to improper handling, overloading, mechanical failure, mini diggers, if you're using like wee diggers digging out ditches or putting in wee paths, stuff like that, improper operation, mechanical failure, accidental contact with utilities. So electrical cables, gas pipes, water pipes, stuff like that. The forests are getting a lot more stuff running through them, especially when you're in areas where there's wind farms. There's a lot more kind of electricity out in the woods and things these days. Goes with a bang if you hit it with the buckets and diggers and things. Stuff like whacker plates, you know, risk of injury due to improper operation, mechanical failure, RSI type stuff, repetitive strain injuries, you know, if you're using them. So that's where you're kind of thinking, right, if I'm going to use machines like this, how am I going to control that? So, you know, you come up with your kind of controls and then you make sure that you're doing your controls and somebody's keeping a good eye on you, all this stuff there. So risk control measures, key one as well is like risk zones within the type of things that you're using. Chippers is a great example of that. So we tend not to chip people through chippers these days, but what we tend to do with chipper accidents is hit them with stuff. So people, so we're felling vegetation or small trees or whatever to chip them, and we fail to keep the risk zones and we hit the people with the small trees because we're not, you know, 2 tree lengths away from the felling type thing. You know, we've not set up our kind of risk zones and things like that. So control and maintenance of risk zones is vital. Tree felling and chippers, you know, that kind of 2 tree length rule is just a lifesaver. About the kind of, if you think about the last kind of 10 fatal chainsaw accidents, probably 7 out of 10 of them was if they've just kept risk zones, they would still be alive. That's the kind of hit by things when using stuff like chippers and chainsaws is the main way that people are injured and killed. So risk zones, working around machinery, diggers, harvesters, forwarders, lorries, risk zones. If you just keep risk zones alone, you will keep many people alive. Okay, so we've got the, as I say, there's kind of extensive detailed documents providing explanation, interpretation and guidance around key pieces of legislation. So that's your, like there's a lot more detail that you can go and look at. So FISA guides, stuff like this all helps you come up with your sort of like risk assessment and your controls. So they also do, information that's more precise than the ACOPS. So there's a good one for safe use of all-terrain vehicles. There's like pure stuff if people are using like winches, so provision and use of work equipment regs, pure. So people using small winches to winch trees about in Windblow, stuff like that. They need to comply with the pure regs. Has that winch been inspected? How's the strops maintained? Have they been replaced? Do they know how to use them? All that type of stuff. So then you've got your industry guidance, which you saw there already with your FISA guides, your Arboriculture Association technical guides, and your VSG stuff and things there. On it there. So the kind of real key piece of legislation that we need to follow as woodland groups, if you're doing woodland work, not construction work. Construction work would be the CDM regs. Woodland work, guidance of managing health and safety in forestry. And that sets out the 5 roles. So as the landowner, so the owner, so like we own the oakwood. If we're doing work in the oakwood, we're the landowner. Potentially, we're also the forest works manager, the FWM. And sometimes we get contractors in, say doing a fence, putting a fence up for us, or doing a wee bit of tree felling or whatever. So this kind of guidance helps lay out the roles as to what you should do and how you kind of manage it. So the FISA, Guidance on Managing Health and Safety in Forestry, should be your Bible. And understanding what role you're undertaking is like really critical. So I did you a wee diagram here. So work by volunteers on the group's land. So we're working in our Oakwood. Volunteer group's the landowner. Volunteer group is the forestry works manager. So we're using volunteers. We're using our own volunteers to do work, clearing broken oak trees or whatever. So basically, we're the employer of our volunteers. So under your FISA guidance, you've got your roles, and this is what you kind of need to do, sort of thing. So the like a landowner needs to tell the forest works manager what's the hazards and constraints, and the forest works manager needs to come up with the controls, and then they tell the people doing the work, here's the controls, here's how we're going to work it on the things there. So that's basically how that kind of works there. Now, if we're doing direct contracting, the contractor is the employer, right? So we're the forest works manager. So we've employed Callum to come along and fix the fence as the contractor. He's got his chaps working there. He's the employer, so he's got his roles. But our role is as the landowner and potentially the forest works manager. I don't know if any of you allow work on the land. So say like a telephone company comes along and wants to put up a telecoms mast. And they want to do work, that would kind of come under the likes of your CDM regs. But if you've sold timber standing, so you've got a group of trees or whatever, and you're just saying to folk, you can buy these trees standing, you come in and harvest them, you're giving them a license to cut the timber. The merchant purchaser is the forestry works manager, and then they're in charge of the forest works manager. Contractor is the employer, sort of thing. That's there. So what does the landowner do? Identifies and shares information on known hazards and constraints. So you imagine working your machinery. So we're going to do a wee bit of digger work with a mini digger with your volunteers. You're the landowner. You need to tell them, no, there's no power lines there, or yeah, there is power lines there. Here's where they are on that stuff there. And then as the forest works manager, use the planning process to try and eliminate as many of these things as possible, working with the landowner for the hazards and constraints that remain. They set the expectations of how they should be controlled, avoided and protected. So you think about using your machinery and the kind of roles and things to do that forestry work, that you've got to kind of think about it. And then that's how you would produce like your risk assessment, which leads to your safe system of work. So contractor, working with the forestry works manager, so employed Callum to do work for us. We tell Callum, here's the hazards and constraints, Callum. Callum develops a way of working around the hazards and constraints and shares that with us. And then what we look at is how his work affects our work. So there's your FISA safety guides. If you go to the FISA page, you can track them down, no problem. And then if you're doing construction work, so anything that's not forestry work would basically come under the CDM regs, which is the construction design and management regs, which is how you manage construction. So construction would be, say, like building a footpath, mountain bike trail, whatever, putting your shed up or taking your shed down. That would all come under kind of like the CDM regs. So that's managed slightly different from the forestry regs, but they are very, very similar. In fact, the forestry regs are actually based on the CDM regs, just with slightly different titles to how the people do it. So under the CDM regs, if you commission work, you're the client, you're not the forestry works manager, sort of thing. So Pass for All do a really good guide on construction design and management regulations. So the CDM regs, they do a fantastically good guide, which for generally for the kind of sort of work that you'd be doing under construction, the Pass for All guide is a really good guide to use. Helps you kind of come up with your client brief, how you, and then the, you know, what you need the people to do, what their roles are and what they need to construct and things there. So your volunteer group, you'll have your own policy documents about how you manage stuff and things as well. So you've got all that kind of suite of official documents, and then you've got your own internal kind of official documents about how you sort of manage stuff, how you look at stuff. And I was going to finish off with a wee bit about the hierarchy of controls. So this is how, when you're doing risk assessment, this is the sort of thing you should think about and how it kind of works. And actually, I've used felling an ash tree as an example. It's just something that generally people can kind of get their head around, a bit easier if it's quite straightforward on the bit there. Okay, so hierarchy of controls. So elimination, physically remove the hazard, don't do the work. So I need to fell an ash tree. Do I need to fell that tree, or can I leave it standing? So it's like a dead ash tree out in the middle of nowhere. I can do a kind of risk assessment and think about it. Actually, do I need to fell that tree? I'm probably putting the person felling the tree more at risk than the chances of somebody being injured by that tree. So you have that kind of debate with yourself. So do I need to fell that tree? So you might not need to fell it. You might just go, tell you what, we're going to leave that tree there. There's not many people come here under the kind of occupiers liability stuff, and under our Land Reform Act, open access and things there. I've made a decision, I'm just going to leave it. Or you might go, actually, no, I need to fell the tree. So you start thinking about, how am I going to fell the tree? And then you start thinking about, well, actually, I can't use a machine to fell the tree. I'm going to have to use a person. So how can I isolate that person? Is there stuff I could do to isolate the person? And then you're thinking about your administrative controls. Is there a way I can change the way that people do that work? And then the very last thing you think about is PPE. So that personal protective equipment, you know, make sure they're wearing like chainsaw gear, helmets, stuff like that. So here we go. So complete elimination of the risk. So stage 4, diseased ash with dangerous limbs. So struck by falling objects is the most common serious injury in tree work. So actually sending somebody in to fell that tree, there's a high chance that they'll get hit by branches or, you know, the trio barber chair or whatever. So do we need to fell it? So trees in a remote location, leave it and monitor. So we can decide, actually, I'm not going to fell it. I'm not going to put somebody at risk to fell that tree. There's a higher risk to injuring the person felling the tree than I've got to somebody wandering past and a branch hitting them at that exact moment that they wander past. So don't bother felling it. So substitution of risk. So stage 4, struck by falling object. Too dangerous to hand fell. Can I get a machine in to reduce that? Can we use, not use a soft squishy person to do it? So can I get some kind of harvester or some kind of tree felling machine in there? There's different types that can actually fell trees like that from the top down. No, I can't get a machine in there. So inaccessible by machine, can I mechanically assist the person doing the felling? Can I reduce the risk of the person being at the base of the tree? So one of the most dangerous bits when you're felling the tree is when you're actually kind of pushing it over and shuggling it to get the tree over. So you're putting the felling cuts in and you've got the back cut in, and then I'm putting a wedge in the back and I'm hitting it with a hammer to get the thing over. And then a big branch falls down on me and kills me. So what about if I give them a nice radio-controlled electric wedge that they can stick in the back of the tree? So they put the felling cuts in, stick the radio control wedge in, and then they remove themselves from the risk zone and work the wedge remotely, and the wedge pushes the tree over, and they're like well away from the tree, nowhere near it, sort of thing. So that's where you're kind of thinking about your different controls. That's me. By beating you all into submission. I should have said at the start, I'll take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, John. Very informative. Who knew about radio-controlled wedges?
Yeah, they're brilliant. I wish I'd had them back in the day. But, when we started using them a couple of years ago, they're just like the best thing out. If you have to go in and fell dodgy trees like that, the more you can kind of remove people from the risk zone, the better, sort of thing. And they just work brilliant. Expensive, but so's killing somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any questions for John? Ross, and you come.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I joined a bit late. That was really helpful. I suppose the thing for us is, like it is for all the small groups, is how we keep up with good practice and how often things are revised. So, I mean, you've given us the state of the art as it currently stands. How often do FLS kind of have to review or change their approaches because there's a change in guidance emerged? Just give us an indication of, not falling into the trap of using guidance that's become out of date.
It's a pretty constantly evolving process. Basically, especially the likes of tree felling and like ash, tree disease type stuff. So it does change. Over a couple of years, things will change, and things like your radio control wedges and things come along and help you out. And it's like, so how do you know that things have changed? That's where keeping up with stuff like the FISA web pages and things really help you. They'll update the guides. They run. They run like, kind of investigations of accidents, and they share the results of the investigations or near misses and things. So you'll have, so it's just about being that kind of proactive and sort of listening to what's going on in the industry.
So on that theme, do the CWA have a kind of health and safety guidance kind of monitoring going on, and a kind of filter stuff which might be significant enough for Community Woodlands to respond to, or is that really our own lookout?
Certainly, as far as I'm aware, we don't do that kind of thing. But what I was actually just about to type that into the chat. What is always a good thing to do is to subscribe to newsletters, because any updates that are made to websites are normally advertised in newsletters. So if you can subscribe to any e-newsletters that come out, then that will be your best way to stay completely informed. Piers, I don't know, you're closer to that aspect of our work. You'll have more information.
We could, yeah, thank you for that. That is good suggestion, and we could do more. And we could also encourage our members to write into us when they discover anything new, or if they have an interesting experience, so that they can share their learning as well. CWA is very much about facilitation, and if we can facilitate our members to do more for each other, then that's the organisation working better than if I or Andy Rockall tried to take control of everything. So, but yeah, that's a good suggestion, and for sure I could do a lot more looking at the FISA web pages. Working at Rothy Mercus, I still get Till Hill safety bulletins, and so if you've got a regular contract with Till Hill, they produce some very informative safety bulletins as well. But much of them will appear on the FISA, or much of their content will appear in the FISA bulletins as well.
Yeah, FISA is kind of like the hub for us, you know, so that's where people put stuff in from near misses or accidents and things there. You also see stuff in the papers and in the sort of timber presses, stuff like that as well. HSE publish fatal accident stuff too, you know, the sort of prosecutions and things. You know, they've been fined X million pound or whatever for this failure to manage the risk, you know.
Okay, thank you very much again, John, much appreciated. Given the time, so it's now just after 3:30, let's take 5 minutes to stretch your legs and we'll come back at 20 to 4. Just stay, don't leave the call, just put your cameras on, turn them off and put your mics on to mute. Thanks, folks. Oh, moving on, we're back to Piers again. Piers was touched on by somebody in the questions, actually talking about standing deadwood. So nice segue into what you have to talk to us about next. So over to you. If you want to take control of the slides, please do.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Right, I'm going to go straight to the conservation volunteers picture of standing deadwood and the value, the ecological value of deadwood. And who doesn't like a bit of deadwood, standing deadwood in particular? Compared with fallen deadwood, they provide different habitats for fungi, lichens and insects. And that's a lot to do with the different moisture levels that you get being a standing tree compared to a tree that's fallen on the deck. And standing deadwood is home for woodpeckers, and at a lower level, and specifically in pine woods, for crested tits. They both excavate holes in standing deadwood in order to find relatively predator-proof nests. And who doesn't like a hulk? So standing deadwood has aesthetic value as well. And before I go much further, I'd refer to the National Tree Safety Group's common sense guidance on tree risk assessment or tree risk management, which basically gives a lot of encouragement to woodland owners, landowners, about not to take things too seriously, and to acknowledge, well, to take things seriously, but to acknowledge the value of big trees and big trees in our environment, their aesthetic value compared to the risks they present. If we were risk adverse, we wouldn't have trees in urban environments. But because trees in urban environments provide a lot of benefits, then we take some of the risks that they present and we live with those risks. And that is regarded as a common sense approach. And as mentioned before, under Windblow, the responsibility of the landowner is to keep folks safe. And it's a dynamic environment, so your risk assessments have to be regular. But as the Tree Safety Group says, a mature tree in a city park presents a low but present risk of falling on somebody, even if it is frequently inspected and treated. This risk is broadly acceptable. The likelihood is typically low of it causing any injury, and people benefit from the retention of a feature that is inextricably linked to why they visit the park. So the same as with your woodlands, people go to your woodlands because they like the trees, even though they know that the trees could kill them. And most people, as I said before, don't go there in a monstrous storm. When assessing deadwood, standing deadwood, and trying to decide what sort of a risk it poses, it can be useful to know what is killing or what has killed a tree. For example, if it's a root decay fungus that has killed the tree, you can assume that the stem wood or the roots are compromised, and you have less time to respond before that tree topples over. Alternatively, the tree may have been killed by foliage infection. For example, stem dieback in pine trees caused by Peridermium pinei. The tree will die from the top downwards, and the risk is greatest from limbs that are hiding up in the top of the tree, rather than the whole structure of the tree falling down. And then look again at what defects compromise the structural integrity of the wood. Ash dieback is now known to cause weakening of the wood fibres and to also make the trees more vulnerable to honey fungus infections. And so trees can not only be weaker, and they can shed limbs more readily than if they were a healthy ash tree, but they can also fail catastrophically at the root base as well, at the stem base, once all the roots have rotted away. So we've got situations with ash trees where tree climbers won't climb them, where it's certainly not safe to put people underneath these trees. As John Ireland was saying, you get the machines in, you have machines that can reach in and take the branches off with shears, etc. And other factors, other factors influencing risk, the way that the tree leans. If I've often assessed dead trees, and if the lean is away from the path, the likelihood of them falling on the path is very low, and I will leave them a lot longer standing before I feel as though I have to take action on them. If a tree such as oak or Scots pine is affecting risk, then I've got more time because the heartwood is more resilient than, say, for example, birch or beech. And I'm more likely to respond quickly to a dead beech tree than I am to a dead oak or a dead pine. And some structural failure can happen without the warning of a weather event. So yes, as we've seen recently, storms can bring some of your deadwood down, but I've witnessed trees falling in a shower of rain without any particular wind, or I've witnessed them falling 7 o'clock in the morning, just as the sun gets up, and you don't know, maybe it was that last fibre that was taken away by the last mycelium of fungus, and the weight distribution shifted and the whole tree came down without any wind to stimulate it. So some trees you need to assess for a range of things and to think the worst of them sometimes. And what can we do about reducing the risk? Inspections is the first thing, but inspections based on zoning your woodland. Busy areas, urban centres, around car parks, anywhere where you've encouraged people to come in, then those are the areas that you want to inspect more regularly. And you probably don't have to inspect the middle of a woodland very much at all. Inspections can be informal. So a lot of roadways you can inspect as you dawdle along in a car, take it slowly on a quiet day. Look for obvious deadwood. You might be looking for changes in foliage colour. things like that. If in doubt of something, then you may need to do foot-based assessments and get out there to see if there's evidence of fungal fruiting bodies and things like that. Most times, staff will be able to give you a little bit of a heads up if they think there's a problem. So listen to the staff, listen to comments from the public, take action to make a slightly more in-depth investigation if you think that's necessary. More formal inspections require more training. So, for example, to identify fungal infections, to look more specifically for evidence of decay, then that needs more experience. But it's only really in very, very busy areas where you want to bring in an arborist on a very regular basis. For most of our woodlands, if you've got significant big trees, then once every 5 years, maybe call in an arborist to give you an assessment on your big feature trees, and then rely on your own common sense and regular monitoring to fill in the gaps in between those years. However, if you've got an area that you're promoting for access, for example, where you've got a high ropes facility or a campsite and you've got camping underneath your trees, then those areas you probably want an arborist in every year to make an assessment of risk and to make recommendations as to what needs to be done. So if you're dealing with pine trees and you find a cauliflower fungus at the base, if that tree is being used for aerial ropeways, then you take no risk with that tree, and that tree comes down. Cauliflower fungus causes root decay and heart rot, and so it's only a matter of time before that tree will fail. And the same is with a number of other fungi, quite specific to some of the other trees, some other tree species as well. So Ganoderma on beech, or Phaeolus schweiниtzii in Scots pine and other conifers. A useful thing in your woodland is to get familiar with some of the key fungi that cause parasitic fungi, and get to know what their fruiting bodies look like, so you can get a heads up on a tree that is infected. You may be able to monitor it for a few years, but at some stage you will have to say, no, I think this tree needs to come out now. It's been waiting long enough. So what else can you do apart from removing a tree altogether? As someone mentioned before, you don't put your car parks and your signboards around the most hazardous trees. You try and route paths away from big trees that you want to retain as standing deadwood, but you want to keep people away from them. And sometimes that's as easy as just mowing the line of the path that you want people to follow and leaving the rest of the vegetation quite long and leggy so that people don't stray into that area. Brambles and blackthorn are a good means of keeping people out of an area if you want to retain a standing dead tree and you don't want people wandering underneath it. Another option is to increase the frequency of inspections. But you may still have some zones where you have no tolerance for deadwood, and you identify those areas and you remove deadwood as quickly as you find it, just to be on the safe side. But particularly, you need to look out for obvious defects such as any rocking root plates or cracks that seem to be opening or unstable. And there are means of reducing some of the risk while retaining some of the deadwood feature. And so I'll just run on to this image. This is a beech tree, looks like a beech tree near a path that has been turned into a monolith. The heavy branches removed, well, all of the branches removed in that one, so that you can get a little bit more life out of that monolith before you think it's going to fail at the root base, and you need to fell it entirely before it does fall onto the path. But you can give it a good number of years as standing deadwood before you need to take any other action. This is standing pine near a very busy path, and it's been like that for a few years now. There is quite a lot of risk building up in the terms of falling deadwood from the branches. There's very little likelihood of the trunk or the root base failing at this stage. So it's the sort of tree that I would put on a sort of amber list. You know, you might record your tree risks as red, amber, and green, and red is requiring immediate action. Amber is perhaps increase your monitoring and factor in or budget in some tree work as and when it's convenient to do it. So for example, this tree, if you've got a tree surgeon in the area, you might get them to use a cherry picker just to take off the worst offending branches and to leave the tree otherwise intact as standing deadwood. But there comes a time when the tree is too risky to leave. You know, all the bark has fallen off, the sapwood is getting very decayed, the dogs and the children have been burrowing underneath the root plate because it's in the bank next to the path, and the lean of the tree is towards the path. So yeah, when it gets to that sort of condition, you know that this old hulk has run out of time to remain a standing deadwood and you need to take it down. And you could still take it down at a 2 or 3 meter height. It still may be usable for crested tits because they will nest in deadwood that's around about 2 meters tall, as well as in larger items, but quite often their nests are quite low down. Okay, I think that's everything I want to say about standing deadwood. There are some additional links. The Conservation Volunteers, the National Tree Safety Group, Health and Safety Executive. They're the sort of go-to features, and some of these we've copied through to the Community Woodlands Association website, and we will make those available hopefully by and by. Okay, over to you for questions.
Two things, if I could, Piers. Firstly, in that last example of the pine tree, how would you safely take it off at 3 meters? And secondly, where could we get training for our group on the appropriate fungi to be aware of?
Yeah, felling trees at 2 or 3 meters only really possible with harvesting tools. Yes, you can't use a chainsaw above shoulder height, so you're restricted there unless you can find some means of getting yourself up to a safe height. Cherry pickers, tree platforms are possible, not necessarily when you're doing a tree work like that. You'd probably want to use the cherry picker for getting the branch wood off and leave a higher trunk after you've taken what's possible with a cherry picker. In terms of training on fungi, we'll need to look into that. Fungal forays are sometimes good places to go, and the mycologists on a fungal foray will pick up on some of the obvious ones, but yeah, we need to look into that or find mycologists in your area who could help you out.
Thank you.
I think Mick was first. Mick, if you want to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Piers. That was good. Yeah, just in terms of making records of inspections, and this refers also to inspections of machinery that John Ireland was talking about previously. What's a good way of doing that? Is it adequate just to have a kind of a book and handwritten dates and details? Is that adequate, do you think?
What I do is I've got a map and I've got a spreadsheet, and I use my phone app to record the GPS location, the grid reference for the tree. When I'm doing an inspection, I'll take some photographs. I try and give that tree a unique reference number, usually based on the subcompartment that it's in. I'll take an approximation of its diameter and its height and what's giving me cause for concern, and I will log those on the spreadsheet with my recommendation for action. And then hopefully in a year's time I will go back to check that record. And being map-based, you can look at it visually, you can work out where they are, remember where they are. If you don't have easy access to GIS mapping, then I would rely on photographs and a record book or spreadsheet on the computer. And then hopefully the photograph will remind you of the location so that you can revisit those trees as needs be. If you have scheduled something for tree work, then use some coloured spray paint to identify the tree so that when you give specifications to the contractors, they can go back and clearly identify the tree that they need to be dealing with. Sometimes you will need to apply for a tree preservation order license approval to do the work. So again, using coloured paint to identify the trees and make it clear to the woodland officer that those are the trees that you want to deal with. And again, if in doubt, I can share with you a spreadsheet that I use.
Thank you, Piers. And Jim, you're next. Thanks.
Yes, hello, Piers. The monolith beech tree, which you illustrated in your presentation there, we've got one very similar in our community wood, which I think would have had its limbs removed about 15 years ago or so. I'm just wondering, what sort of timescale would you expect a tree, a monolith like that, to remain upright?
I don't know. With beech, to be honest, I wouldn't give it a huge length of time. I would have thought that 15 years might have been adequate. I've learned a little bit from experience by using glyphosate to ring bark trees and to kill beech trees standing. And I was quite shocked at what fails when you do this, and discovered that stems and branches, 30 to 40 centimeters in diameter, have been failing after 2 or 3 years, which was kind of quite shocking for me to come back and find these big lumps of wood lying on the deck. And I thought, that's not safe. I don't want to do that anywhere near where anybody goes. So whether it's the use of glyphosate that specifically is more making this tree more prone to failure, I don't know. Possibly it's killing it when it's green and therefore with a lot of moisture in it, and the rot takes in more quickly. But I think have a look at the monolith. Which way is it leaning? Which way is the weight balanced on it? And if you can leave it for a bit longer, yeah. And again, just see what's using it as well. If there's a lot of ecology going on in it and you think, yeah, this is still valuable, then try and get as much out of it as you can. And then experience eventually will tell you what is safe. And you have to accumulate your experience and at some point write guidance for someone else who comes after you and say, yeah, don't leave this for more than 15 years or don't leave this for more than 10 years.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very encouraging.
Okay, Piers, thank you very much for that. That was really, really interesting. Now, I'm going to take control back briefly and then hand it over again to our next speakers. So next up, we have Ross Johnston and Tim Elliott from Cambusbarron Woods in Stirlingshire. Now, gentlemen, would you like to take control of your own slides?
Yeah, that's fine.
So you should have a button at the top of your screen that says take control.
Yeah, I'll just click that.
Perfect, there you go.
So is it on slideshow for the rest of you?
It is indeed.
Okay, fine. So yeah,
now we stop. Have we stopped presenting? No. Beg your pardon. It was just the button I clicked. All good. Carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks all for giving us the opportunity to talk about what I think is just an example of how an individual group can try and take things forward in light of the guidance that Piers and others have set out. You know, there's this raft of guidance and good knowledge out there. How do we make it work at a site level? And I suppose what Tim and I are going to do is recount where we currently are with our community woodland and try and give an honest account of the pluses and minuses we feel, but no doubt there'll be thoughts that you can offer which will help us in trying to get the approach right. So if I move on, just to set out a bit of background to our woodland. It's a 64 hectare woodland on the edge of Stirling. Some of you may well know it. It was, yeah, unmanaged, I think, pretty much. It was part of a large area of ground owned by an estate that was then sold off to a quarry company who weren't really interested in the woodland. There'd been some planting before under the estate, but the quarry company really just left it unmanaged because they were more interested in what lies underneath. There been an ongoing and quite bitter struggle in the village around the quarry area. There is an active quarry, or there was an active quarry, and the planning permission around maintaining the life of that quarry, which was under a real challenge, but planning permission was given, again under the minerals license, for quarrying to resume, or the potential for quarrying to resume over a larger area. Part of the motive behind purchasing the woodland was to create something positive for the village to focus on, rather than the fear of the impact of resumed quarrying on the village in terms of noise and dirt and road traffic and the like. So an opportunity arose to buy the woodland in 2019, supported by the Scottish Land Fund, and the Community Trust did that. It's an interesting combination of things. So it's, there's abandoned Victorian mansion that was blown up in the 50s because it was felt to be dangerous, but the rubble's still there. A lot of the kind of walled garden and the ornamental features, including ponds, are still there, but in pretty poor state. And our work is largely been trying to restore those areas. And it overlays, as well as the quarry adjacent to it. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a limestone mine, and we've got 2 abandoned entrances to that mine on our property as well. So we've got a kind of unusual range of hazards, which is presenting us a struggle in finding liability assurance, which Piers and others will be aware of, which we're still trying to resolve. But we'll focus today just on where we are with the woodlands. So having talked about what the wood looks like, is a kind of a slide showing the extent of the woodland. What you can see is the quarry areas to the left there, which are potentially could be reactivated when the market's right. So there's permission for those. The community woodland, the boundary is quite hard to see on here, lies to the kind of to the north and to the east of the quarries. Is that line nearest the village, and where you see all the orange dots, that's the kind of features of interest. And you'll see the blue lines, it's crisscrossed by lots of paths. So people from all over Stirling and further afield come to walk and cycle in the woods. It's a really active place. So I'll maybe get Tim to talk to this point. We recognise that we're inheriting a largely unmanaged wood, and one that's really actively used for access by all sorts of people presents a risk, which, you know, is the focus of the discussion today. And the first step we took was to produce a tree safety plan. So if Tim's on the call, I think he is. I don't know, do you want to sort of run through the process that you led, Tim, in producing the tree safety plan?
Yep, we'll do very briefly. Really, the Trust recognised it had a duty of care to users of the woodland as well as to volunteers and other people. And so the first step was really to review what guidance was out there, and really found that the National Tree Safety Group guidance was really excellent, pragmatic, practical, realistic, common sense advice and guidance. And we used that, the two documents, 04 and 05, to provide a framework for tree safety which the Trust can implement. And I'll explain a little bit more about the tree safety plan itself in a moment. But essentially, we use the approach of looking at our management structures, what our internal competencies were and weren't, and what our limitations were, and then looking at the usage and the type of uses and the extent of them within the woodland, and then applying that to zoning the woodland, how it was used, which areas of high intensity, which areas of very low intensity, so we could try and set that aside, give a framework for hazard assessment of either individual trees, groups of trees, or larger areas, and also working that through to an inspection regime and actions, both informal inspections internally, formal inspections internally, and also looking outwards to getting outside help and recognising where we needed it to provide more specific advice to help us manage our own risks, really, as well as those of users. And in doing that, we had very useful advice and guidance from Piers, thank you, who gave an overview of what we produced and considered it was, you know, pretty much okay. So if you'd like to move on, Ross, to the next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. And on to the next. So it was produced last year, and we've been taking it forward this last 6 months. On to the next one, please, Ross. Right, so this gives you an idea of our zoning. So this is entirely home produced from common sense, but knowledge of the woodland. The yellow ones are the high usage zones, which includes a Victorian wall garden where there's community activity fairly, probably daily or very much twice weekly, and including nursery children and so on. A nearby woodland base that we use for woodland operations, lay down area, car parking and so on. Access routes past residential properties to that. Also, the larger yellow blob in the middle is where the former Polmaze Castle was, which is a heap of rubble, but also the remains of ornamental gardens and policy woodland, including some very impressive, notable and veteran trees, particularly conifers, although perhaps most of the woodland is broadleaf overall. And the green areas are well-used, medium intensity zones, used probably not hourly, daily, for dog walkers, runners, mountain bike users, and horses. So, and even beyond that, we have a whole network of the grey paths where they are all used, but we felt that they were in a lower risk and intensity zone, so we would have an appropriate regime for those. So this was really the approach to all our activity in terms of assessing and planning for risk. On to the next one, please. So that document's been in place, and if you like, I think provides a kind of a safety comfort blanket for the trusts in its day-to-day, includes inspection regimes from quarterly for high intensity areas down to 6 monthly for the medium ones, and if you like annually or beyond for the low ones beyond. And varies from internal volunteer users or even the public. We provide a facility for them to email in concerns where they see them, because they're amongst the heaviest of users. But also coming out of that was looking at more specific expert guidance, recognising our own limitations, despite two of us having basic tree inspection training, and also one or two others been involved in woodland management for some years.
Yeah, maybe Tim, shall I touch on some of the other context at that point? So, I mean, as well as the technical kind of health and safety requirement and the advantage of getting a professional survey in to, inform our approach, maybe just a few of the bullets here reflects the context for us. The other added benefit of getting an external report in that we've been through a very difficult period as a trust, largely stemming from getting a statutory plant health notice, which led to us having to fell larch, which was the majority species in a lot of areas, over a third of the woodland. So the appearance of the woodland in terms of the felling of the trees and the impact of the felling being carried out by big machines in wet weather really created a very difficult situation for us. And to the extent that we had to call an emergency general meeting to get approval to continue as a trust, because some members of the community, including some trust members, were seeking to remove us, the current committee, because of the perceived negligence and damage to the woodland. So people want to proceed with caution anyway, but we've adopted, after that experience, given us even more cause to adopt a very precautionary approach to taking forward any woodland management actions. And part of the value we identified for getting the independent tree safety survey coming in was to validate the management actions we should have been taking anyway, but being able to point to an independent expert as the source for that advice rather than our own assessment, which, with thanks to presence of Tim and others on the committee, it's pretty professional anyway. But we need, in the circumstances we're in, to have something more independent to point to, and that may or may not be a context for other community woodland groups, but it certainly was of value to us. So I just wanted to kind of cover that context for why we, were happy to invest the money in getting this survey. So I don't know, Tim, do you want to carry on from there?
I can do, yeah, fine. So taking this forward, we had a good scan round to who could help us with the tree safety assessment, recognising that it's a big area, despite the fact that we'd zoned it, and we just wanted to look at the if you like, the high risk zones or the high intensity use zones, and affordability, and just who has the capability of carrying this out, because most forest consultants provide advice and guidance on forestry, but not so much on specific tree safety. It's more the province, in my experience, or in our experience, of arboricultural consultants. But equally, arboricultural consultants generally tend to deal with groups, individual trees, parks, gardens, that sort of scale, rather than looking potentially at 64 hectares of community use. However, if we move on to the next one, please, Ross, thank you. We did find Matthew Cooper on some recommendation, who is relatively local to Stirling, and after some discussion was prepared to firstly come and have a day's walk over with us to scope with us what we thought was necessary and appropriate for the woodland. Really useful exercise. I learned a lot, and so did my colleague who came along with Matthew. We toured the woodland and the routes and the zones, and tried to see if our sort of concepts in devising the plan were appropriate, and it was felt they pretty much were. So we had some initial advice and guidance from him during that day, but we felt it was worth investing in carrying out a further stage, which was to be more specific. And he carried out in December last, actually, and delivered just before Christmas, a negative tree survey on his suggestion, which, in other words, he records trees which are worthy of note, action or concern, so that we could have those on the books, and also tag them, record the status of those individual trees which have been identified, tag them for later identification in the field, and also brought those through to a spreadsheet and linked through to a Google map, which you'll see on, I think, on the next slide, if we could go to that.
Yeah, the next slide. So yeah, it just illustrates the range of issues which were picked out in the report, and which you've all, other presentations have picked up. But the report includes some photographs illustrating sort of key tree safety challenges, I suppose. So just sort of run through those: the kind of windblow, failed union, dead trees. I mean, there are a few dead trees sort of propped up on other trees. Those were the kind of highest risk identified. Hanging branches, picked out squirrel damage. It won't be the only ones who've got an infestation of grey squirrels, so picked out where that was leading to obvious signs of damage, and then fire damage as well, where trees have been weakened by fire. So I've put it back to the products then. So Tim, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so we've got an interactive map here, which is useful in the field, in terms of it being a Google map, so it can lead you to an individual tree. Unfortunately, it doesn't map individual paths. So with all these systems, you have some limitations on usability, which isn't absolutely ideal. We can perhaps talk about those sorts of things later, but essentially as an initial tool, very useful, and provides a visual picture of what we've got and where, at least in grid reference coordinate terms, and overall mapping. So it doesn't show the individual paths, which would have been an extra stage of usefulness. But if we go to the next one, please. And each one has been individually assessed. This is just a summary. The tree assessments have been done in this rather traditional sort of British standard format, looking at tree identification, height, breast height diameter, spread, north, south, east, west, condition, likely longevity, hazard assessment, actions recommended, and then overall urgency rating. As an action plan, the range of urgency, you'll be interested to know, this is 22nd of December. The most urgent was within 7 days. So we had several of those trees which presented us quite significant challenges, others within 10 days. and a number within 3 months, and others a longer time span or just for re-inspection. So that was perhaps a little bit unexpected, and we've had volunteers working very busily where they feel it's safe to do so over Christmas to do the most immediate ones or take other actions to secure the areas. And then, of course, we've had the storms this week, which have brought their own frisson to the situation. But we do have one chainsaw qualified volunteer who's very much aware of the limitations in terms of windblow and difficult, dangerous trees, and a recognition that many of the tasks need to be undertaken by contractors, and we're in the process of scoping that at the moment. You can imagine that with, I think, 150 trees identified as needing some action, that there are quite considerable financial implications and all this that aren't necessarily budgeted for in previous budgets. So there are some challenges both in terms of urgency and affordability. And against that, we also have ongoing ash dieback as well, which have contributed to some of the recommendations in the report.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I think one of the key questions for us is going to be, we won't have enough money to do all the things that are listed as recommended. So it's, I mean, in many senses, it's having a report like this can be a bit of a cross to bear, in that it sets out the ideal of what you should do in management, which is probably beyond our scope in terms of the money we can offer. So what choices do we make based on the report in you know, where we use our resources to take action? So and you know, that seems pretty sensible in terms of management. That's a typical management challenge, but for us, it's handling the community understanding of that prioritization, that given the sensitivity we've had in the past, that we are going to navigate. So this Saturday, we're going to have a public event about the future management of the woodland over the next year, and raising awareness of the tree safety survey and how we plan to interpret it is going to be a key part of that. But you know, one event isn't going to sort that. We're going to have to carry on that discussion for the next year and beyond. I could perhaps end the presentation there, if that's okay.
Thank you both very much indeed for that presentation, and a very interesting bit of work that you're doing there, which I'm sure now is giving you more of a headache than you thought it would have. Any questions for the guys from Cambusbarron?
Well, I've got one for the group, really.
Sure.
How unusual is a kind of negative tree survey? Is this fairly standard? Is it something that all community woodlands are doing as a matter of course, or is it kind of an exception?
Andrew, your hands up. Oh, Andrew, was yours a question? Can I just check, or are you answering?
I was going to raise a question, but in response to Ross's own question, I would say that at Anagach it is something that we are just starting to grapple with. We've got potential issues which are a magnitude of order larger than yours, given the extent of our woods. And it is something that the board, and we've had a fairly wholesale reorganisation of the board within the last few months. So it's something the board is trying to get to grips with.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else got a response to that question? James, you...
Yeah, James Tebbs. Our wood is much smaller than yours, and without the help of the SRUC, who run a forestry course from Cooper, we couldn't identify. We don't have anybody in the trust who could identify tree problems that are affected by fungal disease or ash dieback. I mean, we can see fallen trees and we can see damaged branches, but we rely entirely on the course manager from the SRUC and his students, who he uses our wood to do some training on, to get that guidance. And unfortunately, we have a lot of volunteers in the trust, but nobody who has the sort of knowledge that you're applying. And you've awakened something in me which says we probably need to do a more detailed. We do woodland surveys, and it's used by wood groups and nursery groups, but not to the depth where you're looking for diseased trees where the disease is hiding somewhere in the wood and making it unsafe. So thank you for your presentation. It really has hit the spot.
Andrew, we've got 1 minute left, so quick question, and you can.
I was just going to pick up on exactly that point and say to Tim, you mentioned that you had some basic training on identification of some tree problems. Where did you get it?
Lantra. It's a standard one-day module at Livingston, so quite local. Very good, excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now there is a question in the comments from Ridian saying that he's got signal issues, he keeps dropping out, but it was a question for the previous session from Piers. Could you or a group share any examples of operating procedures or protocols for volunteers with the appropriate certification and PPE assisting with forestry operations? He would like to share them with the board.
Yes, I could look at that question more closely. I'll try and copy it down from you, Sharon. But yeah, but it's also a good question to put out there on the CWA Google group, because I think there's a lot of woods. I mean, Dunnet might be a good example of how they work with volunteers and their woodland person and using chainsaws.
We'll put that on the group tomorrow then. That'll be super. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you for those attending and for your time today. It's been 2 hours. It's been an extremely useful and very informative session. So thank you so much for giving up your time and being so involved. It's been an absolute delight. This will be put on YouTube as soon as possible, and you'll be able to review it there or share with colleagues from there. So have a lovely evening, folks. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Thanks.